After the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, we've been witnessing one of the strong financial performances of this consumer product industry. Oh yeah, we're talking about the pharmaceutical industry, indeed. Drug research took place amid a blaze of publicity, and we even saw remarkable innovations in a short period of time. On one hand, as an industry responsible for people's health and well being, it was extensively funded by the government for the development of new drugs through taxes, which was then overcharged for company profits. On the other hand, these companies are still a part of capitalist society, meaning they have to make money for their shareholders. So, the tendency to drive greater revenue continues. Big Pharma faces the dilemma of making profits as a company or lowering it for people's well being. In the eyes of consumers, retail partners, employees, and politicians, things may look different. These key stakeholders have a more fundamental lens for understanding the current Big Pharma dilemma.
One example of pharmaceutical companies picking profits over patient care was the release of the drug remdesivir by Gilead Sciences in 2020. The drug was shown to shorten time to recovery in COVID patients, and its development was funded in large part by taxpayer dollars, but the company went on to price remdesivir at $3,120 for patients with private insurance. The choice made by Gilead Sciences cemented the fact that even in a global pandemic, pharmaceutical companies were focused on profits rather than patient care. One of the best examples of how ridiculous drug pricing has become is insulin. According to the CDC, 1 in 10 Americans have diabetes and find themselves reliant on insulin to survive. However, the price of insulin has increased consistently in the last 2 decades. According to Truven Health Analytics, a vial of Humalog insulin has gone from $21 to $216 through a process of more than 2 dozen price hikes. Untreated diabetes is a serious illness that can lead to blindness, neuropathy, and even death, and as insulin prices continue to soar, diabetics have been forced to take drastic measures to get their hands on medicine. Instances of insulin black markets have become common, but patients using these resources worry about the quality of the products they're purchasing, rightly so. Moreover, many of these suppliers in networks are actually diabetes patients themselves who make the dangerous choice to ration and sell their own supplies to support themselves. On the other hand, one might argue that increased profits for these companies might promote the invention of new and better medicines. However, many pharmaceutical companies have transitioned from developing new drugs to focusing primarily on the sale of current products. The number of new drugs approved per $1 billion spent has been on the decline in the last 40 years as companies pocket these profits generated by price hikes.
As a supporter of the big pharma industry, we first have to establish that drug development is extremely expensive. All right. And we have to understand that maybe, just maybe, big pharma companies did not materialize over some corporate conspiracies or unethical practices to keep the drug prices high and eliminating the competitors. Instead, it may be simply a natural economic phenomenon driven by market forces. First, we have to understand the cost of a pharma business. The average cost of developing a new drug and putting it through all the trials ranges from $300 million to $2.8 billion. This is data just from the 2020s. And unlike other businesses, the investment does not always guarantee a return if the clinical trial fails or if the drug is rendered obsolete even before its debut after clinical trials. Hence, there exists a natural barrier to entry for smaller firms. Such smaller firms simply do not have the resources to put the drug through every stage of development. So sometimes selling the patent to a big pharma company will be the only option. The second thing to consider is a risk associated with such investments. A drug may be taking 10 years, 20 years, or even longer to develop. There is no guarantee. Drug companies are also companies and corporations at the end of the day. They have shareholders and a board of directors that they have to answer to. In order to convince people to invest in such a risky business, there must be a greater reward. A common sense, which in the world of business, one cannot simply judge the profit they have made after the fact and claim that the profit is too high and unethical. It can be thought of the problem of whether the chicken came first or the egg came first. Without the promise of profit, there may never even be such high investments in the first place. Statistically, pharmaceuticals have been investing on average 17% of total profit on research and development, which is already a huge percentage compared to other industries. Lastly, there have been many arguing that big pharma has gained a monopoly and became stagnant. And we have to understand that this may not be the case. And what we see is a constant decrease of output per dollar invested. But as you see in this graph, that there may not be an infinite new number of drugs that you can make, right? And in this article, it has shown that a library of all possible drugs is being mapped. So there is actually a finite number of drugs that you can make. So your options to try is actually deteriorating. And this may be contributing to why there's actually less new drugs per dollar invested. It is possible that drug development options are simply becoming less and less obvious, and any new drugs are becoming more and more complex. The cause for a paradigm shift in the drug development to move away from, for example, the organic chemical compounds. A new paradigm such as gene therapy, viral vector therapy, or aging therapy may be the necessary fresh water for pharmaceutical companies to make the big strides again.
Canada's drug prices are among the highest in the world, second only to the United States. Prices of drugs in Canada are established when compared to the average price of a group of similar socioeconomic countries. The US, being one of them, skews upwards the average greatly. As a countermeasure, in 2017, Justin Trudeau's administration announced a proposal that would reform drug prices. The reform, finalized in 2019, would introduce three major changes: the listing of actual price of drug, currently kept hidden, introduction of new economic factors that would lead to a fair price, and replacing the US and Switzerland by 6 other countries in the group of used to set the average price. Government claimed it would cut down costs by $8.8 billion over 10 years, a threatening prospect for global pharmaceutical and which could set an international precedent. Pharmaceutical industry fought back with considerable challenges, two federal court challenges, and threats, such as job loss and delay in new drug launches in Canada, such that 5 years later, in 2022, with the additional leverage that provided a global pandemic, the Canadian government announced a watered-down version of the reform. True prices would not be revealed, and companies would not need to justify drug value to price. Consequently, expected savings were reduced to $2.9 billion over the next decade. Furthermore, Moderna is set to open a vaccination manufacturing plant in the outskirts of Montreal by 2024. It will be funded in part by the federal government, but should provide employment as well as steady source of vaccine. On a somewhat positive note for Canadians, back in 2019, the federal government, in coalition with the NPD, planned to set up a National Pharmacare Act by 2023, which could potentially increase our purchasing power with the prospect of lowering drug costs by 5 or 7 billion per year. This would be achieved by implementing measures such as bulk purchasing. Effective and efficient biomanufacturing by pharmaceutical companies is a crucial cornerstone of a modern society, as was clearly evident in the past year. However, we should not expect the pharmaceutical company to function as a benefactor, but as a business that seeks gain and profit. As part of the market, however, it is susceptible to market pressure. It is our government's responsibility to limit its influence such that customers pay a fair price for their medicine.